Story 1. The Woman in the Road, KNOWS Your Name. The woman standing in the middle of I-70 at 2:47 in the morning knew my name before I rolled down the window. That was the first wrong thing. The second wrong thing was that she was standing in the westbound lane while I was driving east, and my headlights should have been behind her, casting her in shadow. Instead, she was lit from the front, from somewhere. Her lips were moving before I even hit the brakes, and when my Peterbilt shuddered to a stop 14 feet from her bare feet, I could read the words she kept forming. Robert, Robert, Robert. I'm Robert Hayes. I've been pulling flatbed loads out of Columbus since 2011. 12 years of overnight runs, mountain passes in ice storms, 40-hour stretches where the white lines start looking like Morse code. I'm not a man who frightens easily. I've driven through tornadic rotation in Oklahoma and felt the trailer lift 6 inches off the ground. I've had a tire blow at 73 miles per hour on the I-80 Donner Pass descent and kept the rig straight through sheer muscle and hatred of dying. I know what fear feels like in my chest, the clenching below the sternum, the sudden clarity. What I felt standing on the brakes for that woman on the night of March 14, 2023 wasn't the fear I knew. It was something older, something that didn't live in the chest. It lived behind the eyes. She was 30, maybe 35. Dark hair plastered to her face like she'd been in water, though the sky was perfectly clear. She wore a white dress that stopped at the knees, and there was a stain on the left side near the hip that I told myself was mud. I hit my hazards and sat there for 11 seconds. I know because I counted. My hand was on the door handle, and I wasn't sure how it had gotten there. Her lips stopped moving. She tilted her head to the right, the way a dog does when it hears a frequency humans can't produce, and then she smiled. Not a warm smile. A smile like a parenthesis around something I didn't want to read. I grabbed my radio handset. Breaker, any eastbound drivers on I-70 around mile marker 212, I got a woman in the road, looks like she needs help. Static. Then a voice just once, very close, as if the person speaking was in the cab with me. The voice said, "She's been there since Tuesday, Robert. She'll be there when you're not." The handset was cold. The CB radios don't get cold. I've touched every piece of equipment in that cab in every season, and the handset is always the ambient temperature of the air inside. It was cold like meat from a refrigerator, like something stored. I set it down. The woman took a step toward the truck. Here's what I know about the human body under genuine threat. The digestive system shuts down, the skin on the back of the neck tightens like a drum head, the vision sharpens on the threat, and everything peripheral turns gray and meaningless. All of that happened when she took that step. What shouldn't have happened was the smell. Through a closed cab, windows up, climate control running, I smelled her. She smelled like a swimming pool, chlorine and something beneath the chlorine. Something biological that chlorine is used to cover. She took another step. I put the Peterbilt in gear. She was faster than she should have been. I don't mean she ran. Her feet barely seemed to move, but the distance between us closed like someone was reeling in a line attached to my front bumper. She was at the passenger side before I'd got to second gear, and her hand came up and pressed flat against the window, and I saw that her fingernails were gone. Not broken. Gone. The skin where they should have been was smooth and uninterrupted, like they'd never existed. I got to third, fourth. I was doing 40 when her hand left the glass. I didn't look in the mirrors. I want to say I did because looking sounds brave and not looking sounds like I knew I couldn't handle what I'd see. Both those things are true. I knew I couldn't handle it. I drove to 60, 70. I had a load of structural steel on the flatbed rated for 65, and I pushed that rig to 78 and held it there for 6 miles until I saw the lights of a fuel station. I pulled in so hard the trailer pushed forward and the fifth wheel groaned. The attendant was a man in his 60s with a face like dry riverbed. He came out with the expression of someone who had seen truck drivers pull in upset before. "Bad drive," he said. "A woman in the road," I said. "Mile marker 212, she needs help, police something." He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "What did she look like?" I told him dark hair, white dress, the stain, the missing nails. He went inside without saying anything. I followed him because being alone in that parking lot felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. He went behind the counter and picked up a phone, a landline, and held it to his ear. He didn't dial, he just held it and listened. Then he held it out to me. "Oh, she wants to talk to you," he said. I didn't take the phone. He looked at me with something that wasn't confusion and wasn't pity. "She always wants to talk to the driver," he said. "She's been calling in since Tuesday." I backed out of that station and got in my truck and drove. I called my dispatcher from my cell, told him I'd had a medical emergency and needed to stop. He found me a truck stop in Salina, Kansas, 40 miles east. I drove it in 41 minutes. I backed into a spot between two other rigs, turned off the engine, and sat in the darkness with my hand still shaking on the gear shift. At 4:12 in the morning, my phone rang, not the CB, my personal cell. The number was the fuel station. I know because I'd looked at the sign when I pulled in, saw the number posted for road service, and my brain, functioning in that hyper-alert state of genuine fear, had photographed it. I let it ring. It rang 17 times, then it stopped. Then a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. An area code I looked up later that doesn't exist in the United States. The text said, "You left before we could finish. You still have something of mine in the cab." I got out of the truck with my flashlight and I checked every inch of that cab, under both seats, in the sleeper, in the storage compartments, behind the seats. I don't know what I expected to find. I found nothing. Or I found almost nothing. On the passenger window, on the inside of the glass, were 3 parallel streaks, like something had dragged its fingertips down the glass from inside. The glass had been spotless when I left Columbus. I clean my windows every time I fuel. Those streaks were fresh. The glass around them was still slightly fogged. I took a photograph. I texted it to my dispatcher with no explanation. He called me immediately. "Robert, what am I looking at?" "Finger marks," I said, "on the passenger window." "Those are on the inside," he said. "Oh, yes." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You okay?" I told him I wasn't sure. He told me to get some sleep and we'd talk in the morning. I locked the doors and lay down in the sleeper and closed my eyes and the smell came back. Chlorine, faint but there. Like someone had cleaned the sheets with it. I didn't sleep. I filed a report with the Kansas Highway Patrol when the sun came up. Gave them the mile marker, the description. The trooper who took my report was polite and professional and wrote everything down and then told me they'd had a report of a woman matching that description in that area intermittently for the past 4 days. 3 drivers had called it in. All 3 had described the same thing. The dress, the hair, the stain, the missing nails. So I asked him what happened to her. He said they hadn't been able to locate her. Every time a patrol unit reached mile marker 212, there was nothing. I asked if any of the other three drivers had stopped. He paused, just a small pause, almost imperceptible, the kind a man makes when he's deciding how much of the truth to tell. Then he said, "Two of them did." I waited. Neither one was able to complete their delivery, he said. Both rigs were found parked on the shoulder within a mile of the marker. He looked at his notepad. Both drivers were found in the cabs, unresponsive. Unresponsive, I said. They recovered, he said quickly. Both were treated and released, but neither one has been able to return to work. Something about the experience. Another pause. They both said she got in the truck. As I thought about the streaks on the passenger window, about how the smell of chlorine had faded by morning but hadn't completely disappeared, I thought about the text message from the number that didn't exist, asking me what I'd left behind, what I'd taken with me. I asked the trooper if I could see the reports from the other two drivers. He said he couldn't share that. I asked if they'd mentioned anything inside the cabs, any evidence she'd been in there. He looked at me for a long moment. One of them, he said slowly, reported marks on the inside of his passenger window, finger marks, and the other one. He stopped, looked at his hands. The other one said he found something on the passenger seat when he stopped, something he didn't recognize. He couldn't describe it well. He said it looked like what a fingernail leaves behind, not a fingernail, what a fingernail leaves when it grows like shells. 10 of them, I thought, 10 small smooth shells. I have driven I-79 times since that night. I take a different route now, a dogleg north through Nebraska that costs me 40 minutes and 2 additional fuel stops. My dispatcher has stopped asking me why. The finger marks are still on my passenger window. I've cleaned that glass with every product available to commercial drivers and they remain. The glass itself looks fine. The marks are in the glass, not on it. Like they were pressed there when the window was molten. Like they were always there and I just couldn't see them before. My phone number has changed twice since March. The number from the non-existent area code has found it both times. It's been 8 months and I haven't received another text. But last week, at a fuel stop in Topeka, the attendant looked at me for a long moment and then said, without me having said anything about it, without any context at all, "She's still out there, you know, mile marker 212. She remembers the ones that drove away." I have no way to know if that's true. I have no way to know if it's worse to be remembered or to be forgotten by something like that. I drive with the passenger window locked now. Climate control only. I don't open it. I don't touch it. I don't look at the marks when I can help it, but sometimes at night when the road is empty and straight and the lights are only cutting so far ahead of me, I can see the reflection of the passenger window in the darkness outside, and in that reflection, very faintly, I can see a hand, pressed flat against the glass, fingers spread. Our nails missing. Waiting. It's always waiting. Story 2. The diner AT exit 33 doesn't exist on any map. Patricia Sullivan's coffee mug was half empty when the waitress refilled it with something that wasn't coffee. Patricia noticed because the color was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not black instead of brown. Wrong the way a photograph of a person is wrong when the person it depicts has been dead for years and shouldn't look that young. The liquid was brown, but the shade was off by a value that didn't have a name. Patricia looked up to say something and the waitress was already walking away. And Patricia's mouth closed, and she sat in that booth in the diner at exit 33 on I-29 in North Dakota and took a sip. Because she was 49 hours into a 60-hour run, and she was exhausted past the point of good judgment. She'd been driving refrigerated produce for 11 years. Reefer unit, insulated trailer. A standing account with 3 produce distributors in the upper Midwest. Patricia Sullivan was 5'4" and 140 pounds and had once helped winch a fallen tree off a highway in Minnesota using chains and her own truck's momentum. And another driver had written her name on a forum as the most capable person he'd ever shared a road with. She was not a woman who sat in diners that weren't on any map and drank liquids that were almost coffee without trusting her own instincts. Well, but she was tired, God, she was tired. The diner had appeared at 3:15 in the morning on October 22nd, 2022. She'd been on I-29 northbound, the dark, flat expanse of North Dakota spreading away from the highway in every direction, the kind of landscape that makes the human brain feel small and exposed. She'd needed fuel and rest, and her GPS had shown nothing for 31 miles in either direction. Then the sign, Exit 33, Diner Open. The word open in red and beneath it 24 hours. She'd taken the exit without thinking hard about it, which was later the part she couldn't forgive herself for. The not thinking hard. The parking lot had 4 vehicles, 2 pickups, a sedan, a minivan. The diner itself was low and flat with a counter and a row of booths, the kind of design that hadn't changed since the 1950s. The smell when she walked in was coffee and something fried and something under that she couldn't name, yeasty, warm, like the smell of a house that has been lived in for a very long time by the same family. The waitress was somewhere between 25 and 60. Patricia would have difficulty later explaining why she couldn't pin the woman's age more precisely. It wasn't that she looked ambiguously middle-aged. It was that she seemed to be actively cycling through ages, catching 30-something for a moment and then sliding toward 50 before landing somewhere uncertain. Her name tag said Grace. She took Patricia's order, a number 2 with eggs over easy and a coffee and orange juice, with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done it so many times the words had stopped meaning anything. The food came quickly, too quickly. Patricia had been in enough diners at 3 in the morning to know that a kitchen running hot enough to produce eggs in 4 minutes was unusual. She ate anyway because she was hungry and tired, and the eggs tasted right and the toast was correct and the orange juice was cold. Only the coffee was wrong. So she drank it anyway. She noticed the other patrons after the second wrong coffee sip. The 2 people in the booth across from her were eating but not speaking, and they were eating in perfect synchronization. Fork raised, fork lowered, chew, swallow, fork raised, perfect rhythm. The man at the counter was sitting with his back to her and had not moved since she'd come in, not once, not a shift of weight, not a reach for his mug. Perfectly. Still in a way that human beings are not perfectly still unless they have stopped. "Oh, excuse me," Patricia said to the waitress. "Can I get the Wi-Fi password?" "Oh, no service here," Grace said, not unkindly. "Never has been." Patricia took out her phone. The signal bars were gone, not low, absent. The symbol that indicated cellular reception had been replaced by nothing, like that feature of her phone had simply ceased to exist inside this building. She tried her GPS app. It opened but displayed a blank gray field. No roads, no exits, no map. "Well, where exactly is this place?" Patricia asked. "Exit 33, Grace said. "Was on I-29's. Grace refilled her mug with the almost coffee. "You drove here," she said. "You know where you came from." Patricia pulled up her offline maps. They showed I-29 in full detail for the surrounding 50 miles. There was no exit 33. There was exit 32 and exit 34, a gap between them that shouldn't have accommodated a whole additional exit, and Patricia knew she had counted the exit numbers because she always counted exit numbers on empty highway as a way to track her progress. She had taken an exit between two exits that didn't allow for one. She put a 20 on the table and stood up. "Oh, you haven't finished," Grace said. "I need to get moving," Patricia said. "Most people say that." Grace began wiping the counter without looking up. "Most people get moving. The thing is, they don't always know which direction." Patricia walked to the door. She pushed it open and the cold outside hit her, the clean October cold of the North Dakota plains, and she walked to her truck and climbed in and started the engine. The reefer unit hummed behind her. She pulled out of the parking lot and found the exit ramp and followed it back up to the highway. She drove north. As after 11 miles, she passed a green sign that said, "Exit 33, 2 miles." She looked at it. She checked her odometer. She had definitely been driving north for 11 miles. She had definitely just come from exit 33. She drove past the exit. As after another 11 miles, she passed the sign again. Exit 33, 2 miles. She took the exit this time because she needed to understand. The ramp curved and deposited her in the parking lot of the diner. The same four vehicles, the same light in the windows. She sat for a moment and then backed out and got back on the highway and drove south because north was producing the same result over and over and south was at least different. She drove south for 11 miles and the sign appeared on her right. Exit 33, 2 miles. Going south. She pulled onto the shoulder and sat with the engine running and her hands on the wheel and worked through it systematically, the way a person does when they are trying to preserve their rational mind. She was on a highway that ran north and south. She had driven 11 miles north and 11 miles south, and both directions had produced the same exit at the same distance. This was not possible. This was therefore not what was actually happening. Possibly she was more tired than she knew and had become confused about her direction. She checked her compass app. North was north. She was facing north. She had been driving north. The sign on her right should be impossible. She found the diner again on her third circuit. She sat in the parking lot without going in and called her husband on her cell, which still showed no service and therefore couldn't make the call except it did. It rang twice and he answered, groggy, confused, 3 in the morning. She told him where she was. He said he'd look it up. She heard him moving, heard the keyboard. He was quiet for a moment. "There's no exit 33 on I-29 in North Dakota," he said. "I'm sitting in the parking lot," she said. Patricia, I in North Dakota doesn't have an exit 33. There's a 32 and then a 34. There's never been an exit there." She looked at the diner. While she'd been on the phone, the lights inside had changed. They'd been warm yellow before. Now they had the flat blue-white quality of fluorescent light in a room with no windows, and in that different light she could see through the glass of the door, and the diner's interior looked different. Larger than it should have been from outside. The counter stretched back farther than the building's exterior allowed. The booths continued into shadow that the fluorescent light didn't reach. Grace was standing at the window looking out at her. She raised one hand, not waving, just raised, palm out. The gesture people make when they are asking you to stop or when they are asking you to wait. Patricia put the truck in gear. She drove at 70 miles per hour and she did not take any exits and she did not stop until she saw the light of a truck stop at mile marker 189. She pulled in. She went inside. She asked the cashier, a teenager with earbuds and a disinterested face, where she was. Nowhere exciting, he said. Mile 189, I-29s. Well, what exit is this? He looked at the sign above. Near the door, the kind of placard that shows the truck stops highway information. Exit 38, he said. She drove the rest of her run in 7 hours and delivered her load of produce to the distribution center in Fargo and then sat in the cab afterward with the engine running. The refrigerated cargo hold was empty. The reefer unit cycled down. She sat in the silence. Her mileage log for that night showed 11 hours of driving. She should have covered 700 miles. She'd covered 412. 300 miles were missing from her night and her body and her odometer, and she could not account for them. She had the coffee she'd drunk at the diner tested by a lab service a week later, using residue from the cup she'd taken without thinking about it, still sitting in her truck. She doesn't know why she took it. She doesn't know why she had it tested. The lab reported that it was coffee, almost entirely coffee. But there was a secondary compound they couldn't identify, not a known drug, not a known toxin. An organic compound with a structure they described as consistent with biological material, but not identifiable with any standard reference. She doesn't drive I-29 anymore. She requested a permanent route change and her company, after some negotiation, agreed. She never told them why. She still drinks coffee on her runs, but she watches the color carefully now. She has learned to see the specific shade of wrong. And on 3 occasions since that October night in 3 different diners in 3 different states, she has looked down at a freshly poured mug and seen that exact shade of wrong brown, and each time she has left money on the table and walked out without finishing. As each time when she looked back through the window, Grace was there, standing behind the counter, watching her go. Well, the same hand raised. Well, the same gesture. To stop or wait or come back. Patricia Sullivan keeps driving, but she's not sure anymore if the road she's on is the same road it used to be. She's not sure the exits she takes lead where they're supposed to. She checks every map now every time she stops, looking for exits that shouldn't exist, looking for gaps in the sequence. She's found 2 so far. She doesn't take those exits. She does not want to know what's at the bottom of the ramp. Story 3, Something Learned How to Drive MY Truck. The cargo manifest said the trailer was empty. Marcus Chen had checked it himself at the loading dock in Phoenix on the morning of November 8, 2021. He'd walked the interior with a flashlight, 48 feet of bare aluminum ribbing and a plywood floor, completely empty, the air inside smelling of cardboard and previous cargo and nothing else. He'd sealed the doors himself with a fresh numbered lock. He had the only key. He'd been driving for 4 hours when the trailer's weight shifted. Not a little, not the settling creak of a load adjusting on a corner. A full weight shift, the kind that changes how the rig handles, that pushes the tail of the trailer out and requires countersteering. Marcus had felt 1,000 variations of that sensation in 14 years behind the wheel of a big rig, and his hands responded automatically even before his brain had processed what was wrong. He corrected, held it. The trailer settled. The weight distribution felt, after a moment, normal. Centered, like something inside had repositioned itself and found its balance. His eyes went to the mirrors. The trailer doors were still locked, still sealed. The numbered lock was visible in the left mirror, intact, swinging slightly from the steering correction. He drove another mile with his heart in his throat and then pulled onto the shoulder and got out and walked the length of the trailer with his flashlight. The doors were locked. The lock number matched what he'd recorded on the manifest. He opened it with his key and pulled the doors and shone the flashlight into the interior. All empty. A bare floor, no marks, no displaced dust, nothing. He locked it back up and got back in the cab and drove. Because he was carrying a sealed trailer from Phoenix to Albuquerque for a company he'd worked with for 3 years. And there was no cargo and no reason to be standing on the shoulder of I-10 in the dark having sensations that couldn't be explained. By the time he'd reached the New Mexico state line, he had accepted that something was in his trailer. Here's why. In the mirrors, the trailer moved, not randomly. It swayed in the rhythm of travel, which was normal, but within that sway there were secondary movements. Subtle. A slight torque to the left when he went right, a lag in the response that wasn't mechanical. He'd driven this truck for 2 years and he knew its rhythms the way a person knows their own heartbeat, and there was something inside that trailer that was shifting its weight in response to his driving, not being tossed by his driving. Responding to it like something trying to maintain its own balance as he turned. He stopped at a fuel station in Lordsburg. While the fuel ran, he walked to the back of the trailer and pressed his ear against the door. All he heard breathing. Slow, deliberate, one breath approximately every 6 seconds. In, out, in, out. He stood with his ear against the aluminum door in the New Mexico cold and listened to something breathe in his sealed, empty, locked trailer. He called the company. The after-hours dispatcher answered on the 4th ring. Marcus told him what was happening. The dispatcher was quiet and then said, "The trailer's empty, Marcus." "Oh, there's something in it," Marcus said. "Oh, the trailer was certified empty and sealed at the Phoenix facility at 0600, the dispatcher said. "I can hear it breathing," Marcus said. "La Paz, how's your tank?" the dispatcher said. "You've got fuel." "Oh, yes." "Finish your run," the dispatcher said. "We'll have someone check the trailer when you get to Albuquerque." Marcus stood for another minute with the phone in his hand. He thought about calling the police. He tried to formulate how that call would go. "Officer, there's something breathing in my sealed, empty trailer." He got back in the truck and drove. The thing in the trailer escalated in the next 80 miles. The weight shifts became more pronounced. He could feel them clearly now, a presence moving front to back, pacing. He could feel it in the fifth wheel, in the way the trailer pulled, the way it resisted turns. And then it stopped pacing and positioned itself directly behind the cab wall and just stayed there. He could feel the concentrated weight. 600 pounds, he estimated from the feel of it, maybe more. Something that weighed as much as 4 men was resting against the front interior wall of the trailer, 3 feet behind his head, separated from him by aluminum and steel. His Jake brake started firing on downhill grades on its own. That's not possible. The Jake brake is a driver-controlled system. He hadn't touched it. The lever was in the off position. But the engine brake fired repeatedly, correcting his speed on descents as if something was monitoring it. As if something understood the physics of the load well enough to manage the braking. He pulled into the Albuquerque facility at 2 in the morning. 2 men from the company were there, which he'd expected. What he hadn't expected was that they were both standing 30 feet from the trailer and showed no inclination to get closer. "Open it," Marcus said. The older one, a man named Doug who handled facility operations, said, "We've been hearing it since you pulled in." "Then you know I wasn't imagining it," Marcus said. Well, we know, Doug said. Marcus took his key to the lock and opened the trailer doors. The interior was empty. The flashlight beams of all three of them swept it completely. Bare floor, no marks. No disturbance of the thin layer of road dust on the floor near the doors. No footprints. Marcus climbed in anyway and walked to the front wall and pressed his hand against it. The aluminum was warm. Not warm the way a sun-heated surface holds warmth, warm like skin, like something had been pressing against it from the inside for a very long time. Oh, he pressed his ear to it. The breathing was still there, from the other side of the wall, from the outside of the trailer, from wherever it had gone when he opened the doors. Just outside in the dark of the facility yard, something breathed at 6-second intervals. We've seen this before, Doug said from behind him. He was standing in the trailer doorway, not coming further in. Not often, but before. Marcus turned. What is it? We don't know, Doug said. Sometimes empty trailers carry things anyway, things that don't have weight until they want to, things that learn the equipment. He stopped. Your Jake brake, he said. Did it fire on its own? 4 times on the descent into Albuquerque, Marcus said. Doug nodded like this confirmed something. It was practicing, he said. Sometimes they practice. Marcus wanted to ask what it was practicing for. He wanted a lot of answers that the look on Doug's face told him weren't available. He climbed out of the trailer and locked the doors and handed Doug his key. I won't be driving that trailer again, Marcus said. That's probably wise, Doug said. Marcus drove his cab without a trailer back to Phoenix. The drive felt different without the weight behind him, felt lighter and wrong in a way that was the reverse of the wrongness he'd felt on the drive down. He kept checking his mirrors for a trailer that wasn't there. He kept feeling the ghost of the weight shifts in his hands. He filed for a new route assignment the following week. His company approved it without questions, which told him that Doug had communicated something to someone and the something had been taken seriously. He never asked what. He didn't want the conversation to include what happened to the trail. Or what it had been used for before, what kind of cargo leaves behind a residue that breathes. He drives a different rig now for a different company, regional routes, home every 3 days. He won't do overnight long haul anymore. He tells people it's about his family, his kids getting older, wanting to be home. That's true. It's also true that he can't sleep in a truck cab anymore. Can't close his eyes in the sleeper with a trailer behind him without feeling the weight shifts, without listening to the sounds of something repositioning itself, without waiting for the Jake brake to fire on its own. 2 months after the Albuquerque run, he received a letter at his home address. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers that he initially couldn't interpret. He stared at them for a long time before he realized they were timestamps. Time and then a number. He recognized the first one, November 8, 2021. The number beside it was 640. The other timestamps were dates after that. 14 more dates ending 3 weeks before he received the letter, each with a number beside it. The numbers varied, some smaller than 640, some larger. He looked up the largest number, 980. He doesn't know what the numbers mean. He doesn't know who sent the letter. He's tried to work out if they're weights or distances or coordinates or something else entirely. He hasn't been able to solve it. He keeps the letter in his house in a drawer in the kitchen. He looks at it sometimes. He's noticed that the numbers are in his handwriting, not similar to his handwriting. His handwriting. Every stroke identical to how he forms letters and numbers, the particular way he crosses his sevens, the specific slant he uses. Oh, he's never written those numbers down. Oh, the last entry on the list, the most recent date, the number beside it is 0. Oh, he doesn't know if that means whatever was in the trailer stopped, if it found what it was looking for, if it's done practicing. He drives home every 3 days and he watches the weight gauge on his rig, and he keeps the windows down even in cold weather and he listens. He's become very good at hearing the difference between a load shifting and something choosing to shift. Well, he hasn't heard anything yet. Well, he's not comforted by that. Story 4, the radio station plays your funeral. Denise Kowalski was 40 miles outside of Billings when the radio station started playing her mother's voice, and the thing that stopped her from turning it off immediately was that her mother had been dead for 6 years. She caught the voice mid-sentence, coming through the scan function that cycled through stations when the signal dropped. The scan clicked past frequencies, fragments of country and static and late-night talk, and then her mother saying, "Denise, honey, you need to listen," and her hand froze over the seek button because that voice was not possible. She pulled to the shoulder. The scan had moved on. She was on 97.4 classic rock and the voice was gone and the night was enormous around her. She sat with her hand over her mouth for 30 seconds. Then she pressed scan again, deliberately this time, going backward through frequencies, looking for whatever 97.4 had been adjacent to. She found it at 96.8. A radio station with no call sign announced, no identifier at all, just broadcasting. And what it was broadcasting was her. Not her voice, the sounds of her life. She heard her alarm going off that morning in her apartment in Spokane, heard herself silencing it, heard the specific creak of her kitchen floor, the coffee maker, the news she'd had on while she ate. She heard herself saying to no one in the kitchen at 5:45 in the morning, "Another day." Now, she had said that, she said it every morning. It was a private thing, a small ritual of acknowledgement before the day ate her. She had never said it to anyone, she had never been recorded saying it. As it was playing on a radio station in Montana. She sat in her truck on the shoulder of I-90 and listened to her own morning broadcast back to her, sound by sound, moment by moment. She heard herself drive to the terminal. She heard her conversations with the yard manager and the dispatcher. She heard herself in the cab for 4 hours of the drive, the engine sound and the occasional adjustment of the radio, and once her own quiet singing to a song she'd liked for years. A private performance she gave in trucks when she was sure she was alone. Though the station was playing this as she sat there, all of it, hours of her morning. She was a trucker because she liked being alone, 12 years of it long-haul solo. She had made a life out of the specific solitude of an overnight run. She trusted the silence of a cab at 3 in the morning. She trusted the unobserved quality of alone. And now something had been with her all day, recording, and was playing it back. Oh, she turned us off the radio. She drove in silence for 11 miles and then turned the radio back on because the silence was worse. The silence made the cab feel occupied by something she couldn't see. At least with the radio on, she could hear the engine noise and the wind and the reality of the road. She found 96.8 again without trying to. It had moved forward in time. It was playing the current moment. The engine, the wind, the road, her breathing. She heard herself in the radio in real time, a half-second delay, her own biology broadcast back to her by something that was listening right now. She called her dispatcher on her cell and left the radio on and held the phone to her ear, and when he answered, she said, "Something is listening to me in the cab. Right now. I can hear it on the radio." Oh, he was quiet for a moment. "Denise." "A turn on 96.8 AM, she said. "I'm putting the phone on speaker." She put it on speaker, she held it near the radio, she waited. "Oh, I don't hear anything," he said. "If it's playing right now," she said. "I can hear it, can't you?" She stopped. On the radio, she heard herself say those words, "I can hear it, can't you?" Half-second delay, everything. "Oh, Denise, I think you need to stop and rest," he said. She turned up the radio volumes. Through the phone, through the radio, she heard him say, "Denise, I think you need to stop and rest." A full second delay now. The station was playing her phone call. It was inside the phone call. "Are you on the radio?" she said. "Can you hear yourself?" "I what? No," he said. "Denise, you're scaring me." She heard that on the radio. "Denise, you're scaring me." She ended the call. She drove with the radio playing her in real time for another 40 minutes, listening to herself drive, listening to her own breathing, listening to the occasional sounds she made unconsciously, the small vocalizations of a person alone. And then the station began playing ahead. She didn't understand what she was hearing at first. The engine sounds changed. Her breathing changed. She heard road noise that was different, rougher, and she heard a sound she didn't recognize, a rhythmic thumping, and then she heard herself, her own voice, say something she hadn't said yet, say it with a quality in her voice she hadn't heard herself use since the hospital 6 years ago, a quality of helplessness. "Please, please, please." She turned off the radio. Her hands were shaking on the wheel. She was doing 65 and she slowed to 50 and thought about the thing she'd heard, her voice, ahead of now, saying please in the way she'd said it sitting next to a hospital bed. She took the next exit, a small town she didn't know in eastern Montana. She found a 24-hour diner and parked the truck where she could see it through the window and went inside and ordered coffee and sat with her back to the wall. At 2 in the morning, she watched from the window as every light on her truck went on at once. Not just the running lights, all of them, the headlights, the marker lights, the brake lights. The entire truck lit up like an accusation in the dark parking lot. It held for 30 seconds, then everything went off. She called the police. A deputy came out, walked around the truck, found nothing. He was kind about it and recommended she get some sleep. She didn't tell him about the radio, she didn't know how. She drove the rest of the route in daylight. She made her delivery. She drove back to Spokane in daylight. She never turned the radio on. She had the truck's communications systems checked by a technician when she got home. He found nothing unusual. He noted that the radio was functioning normally and made a small observation. The radio had been programmed with a favorite station at some point that she hadn't set, 96.8. She asked him to remove it. He tried. He told her afterward that he couldn't. The station had been written into the radio's firmware at a level he couldn't access without replacing the unit entirely. He didn't know how. It wasn't a function available to users. It would have required access to the manufacturer's programming tools. She had the radio replaced. In the new radio, 96.8 is still there, still a favorite, still preset in position 1. She's driven 11 months since that night without turning on the radio. She drives in silence. She's gotten used to it. What she hasn't gotten used to is the half-second delay she notices sometimes in her own thoughts. A slight lag between thinking something and experiencing it. Like something is listening ahead of her. Like something has learned the pace of her mind and is running just slightly in front. She sometimes thinks she hears in the silence of the cab a faint sound, not quite static, not quite breathing, the sound of a radio station carrying a frequency that human ears aren't quite designed to receive. She hears it most clearly in the last miles before dawn, when the sky is neither dark nor light, when she's alone on the road and theirs. No other sound and the thought comes, someone is listening. Oh, she's right. Oh, she's just wrong about who it is. Story 5, the last truck stop before the end of the road. The fuel gauge on Raymond Acaffer's truck read empty at mile marker 847 on US 93 in Nevada. And that was impossible because he'd filled it in Las Vegas 6 hours earlier. And the truck had a range of 700 miles on a full tank, and he had only driven 212. The gauge dropped to empty the way a gauge drops when a fuel line severs, sudden and complete, and the engine continued running, which meant it wasn't a fuel line and it wasn't real. Except that the low fuel alarm began screaming and the engine management system agreed with the gauge. Empty. 212 miles of fuel and not a drop of it left, according to every sensor in the truck. He'd been driving this route for 9 years. US 93 north through Nevada into Idaho was a run he knew the way he knew his own apartment, every marker and grade and curve committed to a geography in his body. He knew there was a truck stop at mile marker 901. He'd been to it 50 times. He drove toward it with the alarm screaming and the gauge on empty and the engine running, which it shouldn't have been, and he thought, something is wrong with the sensors. He thought this very deliberately as a way of maintaining his rational mind. Something is wrong with the sensors. The fuel is there. The engine proves it. Drive to 901. He reached 901's. The truck stop wasn't there. Not closed, not dark, absent. The turnoff was there, the gravel access road, the pale rectangle of foundation where the building should have been. He'd been here 2 weeks ago. He'd spoken to the woman at the register about her granddaughter who was starting high school. The building was gone. The pumps were gone. The canopy that sheltered the pump island was gone. The foundation was there, and it was old, weathered, as if nothing had stood on it for decades. He sat on the shoulder with his hazards going and tried his cell phone. No service. He tried his CB, static. He tried the satellite communicator his company had installed for exactly these situations. It powered on, attempted to connect, and displayed a message he'd never seen in 9 years of satellite communicator use. No satellites found. He was a man who lived close to practicality. Raymond Acaffer, 53 years old, 22 years of commercial driving, former military, a man who had once changed a blown steer tire on I-15 in a sandstorm alone in the dark using only his toolkit and a flashlight held in his teeth. He breathed. He thought. He had fuel that the sensors denied and no communication and a missing building and 200 miles of Nevada desert in every direction. He drove on. The next marked stop was at mile marker 940. He reached it in 40 minutes with the alarm still screaming. The stop was there. He turned in with relief flooding his body and noticed, as he pulled under the canopy, that the pumps were analog, manual dials. The kind he hadn't seen in operation since the 1990s. The building was wood-sided. The sign above the door was hand-painted. The name of the truck stop was not a chain he recognized. A man stood at the single pump island. He was wearing coveralls with the name of the stop on the chest, and he was watching Raymond's truck come in with the expression of someone watching something he'd been waiting for. "A fuel," the man said when Raymond got out. "Oh, please," Raymond said. The man began fueling the truck. He used a handwritten tablet to log the transaction, not a computer. Raymond watched and thought about the analog pumps and the hand-painted sign and the wooden building and the man's coveralls, which looked old in a way that wasn't wear, more like they were from a specific era. "You come down from 901, the man said. "I tried to," Raymond said. "It's gone." Well, the man didn't react to this. "Sometimes it is," he said. Raymond looked at him. "Sometimes it is," he repeated. "Some things are there when you need them and not otherwise," the man said, "and some things are there when you're ready and not otherwise." He finished fueling and hung up the nozzle and read the dial. He named a price. Raymond paid in cash. The man wrote it on the tablet. "Oh, what's this place?" Raymond asked. "A fuel stop," the man said. "It's not on my maps," Raymond said. He'd already checked his phone, which now had one bar of service, a thin and tenuous signal that had appeared when he'd pulled under the canopy. "A few people's maps," the man agreed. He tore the carbon copy of the transaction from the tablet and handed it to Raymond. "You got somewhere to be." "Idaho Falls," Raymond said. The man nodded. "You'll make it," he said, "if you drive straight through." Raymond took the receipt. He looked at it. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m. He looked at the time on his phone, 3:14. He looked at the name of the stop at the top of the receipt. He read it twice. I. T was his name, not the name of the stop. Raymond Ockafer, printed at the top of the receipt where the business name should have been. "Oh, this says my name," Raymond said. "Oh, yes," the man said. "Well, why does this say my name?" The man looked at him with an expression that was not unkind and not explanatory. The expression of someone who knows the answer to a question and has decided not to be the one to say it. "Drive straight through," he said. "Don't stop again until Idaho Falls. Don't take any exits between here and there." "Well, why not?" The man was already walking back toward the building. He stopped at the door with his hand on the frame. He turned back. "Not every truck stop you can leave," he said. "You got lucky finding this one first. Drive straight through." Raymond drove straight through. He stopped for nothing. He passed 2 exits in Nevada and 3 in Idaho that showed lit signs, fuel, and food, the kind of signs that on an ordinary night he would have considered stopping at. He drove past all of them at 70 miles per hour and watched them in his mirrors until they disappeared and did not turn back. He passed one exit in southern Idaho that had no lit sign, just the number on the green marker. He glanced at it as he passed, and then the mirror showed him something that took him several seconds to process. A figure at the top of the ramp, standing at the edge of the highway, watching him pass. He saw it for 2 seconds in the mirror before the road curved and the figure was gone. The figure was him. Same build, same jacket, same posture he knew from reflections. Standing at the top of the ramp watching himself drive past. He drove. He delivered his load to Idaho Falls at 6:40 in the morning. The delivery crew was surprised to see him because he was 3 hours early, and he didn't know how that was possible given when he'd left Las Vegas, but he didn't argue it. He sat in the truck after and unfolded the receipt from the fuel stop. The price on it was zero. He was sure he'd paid. He remembered the exact bills, remembered the man writing the amount, remembered the math of making change. He'd paid. The receipt said zero. At the bottom of the receipt, below the transaction details in the same printed font as his name at the top, were 4 words. You were the cargo. He has tried every method available to him to find that fuel stop on US 93. He's driven the stretch at mile 940 a dozen times since. There is nothing there. No building, no foundation, no evidence of a pump island. His company's fuel records show a stop at a station in Nevada on that night, a station that paid out a credit card transaction. The address of the station resolves to an empty lot. The station's tax ID number does not appear in any Nevada business registry. He drives US 93 still. He has to, it's his route. He drives past mile 901 every time, and sometimes the truck stop is there, exactly as he remembers it, and sometimes the foundation is bare. He never knows which it will be until he gets there. He doesn't stop at 940 anymore. He fills up before he reaches Nevada and drives straight through. He has not seen the man in coveralls again. But 2 months ago, on the southbound return, he passed mile 940 at 3 in the morning, and his headlights briefly illuminated the edge of the road, the gravel shoulder, and standing there at the margin of the light was a figure in his jacket, his posture, watching him pass. He saw it for less than a second. He did not stop. He did not check the mirror. The receipt is still in his glove compartment. He looks at it sometimes when he's parked, when the cab is quiet and the route is done. The words at the bottom haven't changed, but something else has. He noticed it recently. Near the top, just below his name, in a font smaller than the rest. An arrival timestamp. A date, printed cleanly like it was always there, like he simply hadn't looked closely enough before. Well, the date is 6 months from now. Oh, he doesn't know what it marks. Oh, he drives his route and he watches the exits and he counts the miles and he waits. Oh, the receipt waits with him. Story 6, the last mile of Route 7. The odometer stopped at 999,999.9 miles at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. And that was when Marcus Chen realized the highway he'd been driving for the past 6 hours didn't exist on any map he owned. He knew the mileage because he'd been watching it. 22 years behind the wheel, and he'd never rolled over 1 million, never come close, and he'd been quietly celebrating as the numbers climbed. Coffee in the cup holder. Merle Haggard low on the radio. The plan was to pull over at the rollover, take a photo, maybe call his daughter in Sacramento. Instead, the odometer hit 9 nines and stopped, froze completely. The numbers didn't roll. They just sat there like they'd been painted on, and simultaneously every mile marker on I-80 westbound vanished. Not passed, not faded in the dark, vanished. One moment there was a green sign. Reading mile marker 312. And the next there was nothing but asphalt and darkness stretching forward into nothing. And Marcus felt something cold settle in the center of his chest that had nothing to do with the February air outside. He'd been hauling frozen pharmaceuticals out of Cheyenne, bound for Reno. Standard run. 53-foot refrigerated trailer, the reefer unit humming behind him, temperature locked at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. He knew every mile of this stretch, had run it probably 400 times. Knew where the way stations were, knew the exact point where Wyoming gave up and Nevada began to feel closer, knew the specific dip in the road near Elko where you had to ease off the throttle or the load shifted. This was his road. He owned it the way a man can own something through repetition and familiarity. And it had been fine for the first 4 hours. Completely, boringly, beautifully fine. Then somewhere between Elko and Wells, the mile markers disappeared and his odometer died, and Marcus Chen understood with the gut-deep certainty that only comes at 2:47 in the morning in the high desert that something was very wrong. He cleared his CB. Any westbound on I-80 you copy. This is Jade Dragon looking for a radio check. The static, not the normal crackle and pop of a quiet channel. Actual static, the deep kind, like being underwater, like the signal itself was struggling to exist. He tried his phone, no bars. He'd had 4 bars in Elko 40 minutes ago. He'd called dispatch to confirm his ETA. Now the phone showed nothing, not even the emergency signal that was supposed to exist everywhere in the continental US. The little icon in the corner that usually said no signal showed nothing at all. Just a blank space where the signal indicator should have been, as if his phone had forgotten that cellular networks were a thing that existed. Marcus was not a man given to panic. You couldn't be, not in this profession. Over 2 decades, he'd handled blowouts at 80 miles an hour black ice, a jackknife that somehow didn't kill him or anyone else on I-70 in Colorado, a medical emergency 300 miles from the nearest hospital where he'd had to talk a dispatcher through describing his symptoms to a nurse over the radio. He was calm in the way that only people who have been genuinely afraid many times can be calm. He'd learned to breathe through his nose, assess the situation, act. He assessed. He was on a westbound highway that looked exactly like I-80 but had no mile markers. His instruments were behaving strangely. Communication was down. He was moving at 62 miles per hour and had been doing so for at least 40 minutes since he'd last noted a recognizable landmark, which was the rest stop outside of Wells with its familiar yellow lights and the gas station that was always closed but never seemed to shut down. He should have passed Wells proper by now. He should have passed the casino with the cowboy sign that he'd seen so many times it felt like a family member. He hadn't. There was nothing out there except the highway and the dark and the high desert silence. He slowed to 40, then 30. The headlights pushed maybe 200 feet ahead and found nothing except road. That was wrong. The high desert was flat. On a clear night, which this was, you could see headlights 5 miles out, sometimes more. You could see the glow of Wells from 20 miles back on a clear night. There was no glow. There was no distant shine on the horizon that meant civilization was coming. There was nothing ahead except the small cone of his headlights and then absolute dark, like the world ended 200 feet in front of him and he was driving toward an edge. He considered stopping. He nearly did. His foot moved to the brake and he had the truck down to 15 miles per hour, watching the road in front of him when his CB crackled. Not static this time, a voice. "Oh, don't stop, Jade Dragon." He knew that voice. It took him 3 full seconds to understand why, and when he did, the cold in his chest dropped about 6 inches lower. That was the voice of Danny Reese. Danny Reese had driven this same corridor for 15 years before dying of a heart attack behind the wheel on February 19, 2020, 3 years ago. Marcus had been one of the 12 people at his funeral. He'd carried the casket. "Danny," Marcus said, because he couldn't say anything else. "And keep moving. You stop on this road, you stay on this road. You understand what I'm saying to you, don't stop." "Oh, Danny, you're dead." "I know what I am. Keep moving and don't stop, and when you see the lights ahead you go toward them no matter what they look like. You hear me? No matter what they look like." Well, the CB went back to static. Marcus's hands were shaking. He was aware of this the way you're aware of pain in a dream, as information rather than sensation. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel and he was doing 15 miles per hour on a highway that had forgotten what it was, and his dead friend had just told him to keep moving. He kept moving. He brought the truck back up to 40. The reefer unit hummed. The night outside was absolute and complete, and Marcus realized that he couldn't see the stars either. He hadn't noticed until now. He'd been focused on the road, on the instruments, on the CB. But the sky above the dark desert should have been luminous with stars, the Milky Way visible, the kind of sky you only got 200 miles from the nearest city. The sky was just dark, not cloudy, not overcast. Just dark, the way a room is dark when all the lights are off. A flat, undifferentiated darkness that pressed against the windshield. He drove for what felt like another hour, though the clock on the dash had stopped with the odometer. He couldn't tell. His body said an hour. His mind said longer. Then he smelled it. The smell came through the vents despite the fact that he had the climate system on recirculate. It was cold and it was sweet, and it was wrong in the specific way that certain smells are wrong before your brain identifies them. He knew that smell. He'd encountered it twice in his career. Once at a wreck scene on I-70, where he'd been first on scene before the emergency services arrived, and once at a livestock transport that had malfunctioned somewhere in Kansas and lost its entire load before anyone noticed. It was the smell of frozen flesh beginning to thaw. He looked at the temperature gauge for the reefer unit, 51 degrees. His cargo was pharmaceuticals. Temperature sensitive, yes, but not meat, not biological material that would produce that specific smell. There was no reason for that smell. Unless the cargo wasn't what he thought it was. He pulled over. He knew Danny had said not to stop, but the smell was getting stronger and something in the back of that trailer was thawing and he needed to know what it was. He needed to know right now. He left the engine running, grabbed his flashlight, walked back to the trailer doors. The locks were fine. His seals were intact. He broke the seal on the left door, which he was authorized to do for temperature checks, and swung it open. The flashlight found 53 pallets of pharmaceutical boxes, neatly stacked, exactly as he'd loaded them in Cheyenne, everything correct. Everything as it should be. The temperature inside read 51 on the wall gauge, and the smell rolled out over him in a wave, cold and sweet and biological, and Marcus swept the flashlight across the pallets one more time and noticed that every single pharmaceutical box had the same address label. His address, his home address in Sacramento, his name, Marcus Chen, with the correct street, the correct city, the correct zip code repeated on every single pallet in the trailer. Hundreds of boxes, all addressed to him. He closed the door. He stood in the dark on the side of a highway that didn't exist, and he breathed very carefully through his nose. Then he walked back to the cab. The lights appeared 6 minutes later. They were red, not white. A cluster of red lights on the horizon that pulsed in a way that didn't match any emergency vehicle or radio tower configuration he'd ever seen. They pulsed slowly, like breathing, like something enormous breathing. He heard Danny Reese's voice in his memory, no matter what they look like. Marcus pressed the accelerator down and drove toward the red lights. The lights grew. They were not on the horizon, he understood as he got closer. They were on the road itself, a ring of red pulsing lights arranged in a perfect circle across all lanes of the highway, and in the center of the circle was a rest stop. A standard Nevada rest stop lit yellow with restrooms and a vending machine and a covered picnic area. A rest stop he'd stopped at 100 times. He recognized the specific angle of the roof and the placement of the trash cans. He drove through the ring of red lights. The odometer rolled to 1 million miles. The mile markers reappeared. His phone showed 4 bars. The clock read 3:14 a.m. The reefer unit temperature gauge read 34 degrees, and the smell was gone. He pulled into the rest stop and sat for a long time with his hands on the steering wheel, feeling his heartbeat slow. When he felt capable of moving, he walked back to the trailer and opened the left door again. All 53 pallets were properly labeled. Commercial pharmaceutical shipper in Cheyenne, consignee in Reno. His name appeared nowhere. Every seal on every box was intact and the temperature read 33 degrees and everything was exactly as it should have been. He never told dispatch, never told his daughter. He filed his logs for the night showing an uneventful run, delivered his load in Reno at 9 a.m., ate breakfast at a truck stop, and drove home. He didn't call the families of any of the addresses he'd seen on those boxes, because he didn't remember any of T. He'd tried to memorize 1 or 2, standing in the dark outside that trailer. But by the time he reached Reno, every address had slipped away from him like a dream slips away in the first minutes of morning, leaving only the knowledge that something important had been there. He still runs I-80. He still runs it exactly the same way, same route, same timing. He checks his odometer every run now. It rolled to 1,000,001 miles on a Thursday in March, and he exhaled with relief that felt embarrassing in its intensity. But the reefer unit is running a little warm these days. Dispatch says it's a maintenance issue. They've had it looked at 3 times, and every technician says the unit is fine. The temperature inside the trailer keeps reading 37, 38, sometimes 40, always just a degree or 2 above where it should be. Just warm enough, Marcus thinks sometimes on the long overnight hauls. Just warm enough to let something slowly wake up. He drives faster after dark. He doesn't stop at rest stops anymore. And when his CB produces static that sounds slightly too deep, slightly too wet, slightly too much like breathing, he turns it off and drives in silence and watches the odometer and waits for numbers that never quite change the way they should. The last time he ran I-80 somewhere outside of Wells, he passed a mile marker that read 999,999. He'd never seen a number that high on a Nevada highway. He stared at it in his mirrors until it disappeared around a curve. In the morning, he told himself he'd misread it. He's still trying to believe that. Story 7, What the Way Station WEIGHED. Patricia Sullivan's truck weighed 80,000 pounds at the port of entry in Laramie, Wyoming, and 62,400 pounds at the exact same way station 4 hours later, which was impossible because she hadn't touched the cargo, hadn't stopped, hadn't lost anything from the trailer except 17,600 pounds of something she couldn't account for, and the Department of Transportation officer who'd run the second way looked at his readout and then at her and said, with no expression at all, "Ma'am, you'll need to pull around back." She'd been hauling construction materials. Steel rebar, boxed hardware, concrete forms, dense, heavy, inert. The load had been sealed in Denver by the freight company, and she'd been given the manifest and told not to break the seals except in a dot inspection. 80,000 pounds, almost exactly at the legal limit. She'd weighed out at the Colorado-Wyoming line without incident. She'd run us 30 east to I-80 without incident. She'd pulled into the Laramie Consolidated Port of Entry at 4:22 a.m. because it was lit and open, and her logbook showed she had time for a quick stop. The scale read 62.4, and the officer's face went flat in that specific way that means something has moved behind it, like a curtain drawing across a window. What's in the trailer, Ms. Sullivan? Manifest says construction materials. Rebar, hardware, forms. I haven't touched the seals. Have you made any stops since Denver? A fuel stop in Fort Collins. I didn't leave the cab. He looked at his readout again. She watched him look at it. He was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, mustache, the specific tired competence of someone who'd been doing this job for 30 years. He'd probably seen everything. The look on his face said he hadn't seen this. A pull around to Bay 3, he said. Leave your engine runnings. Bay 3 was around the back of the port of entry building, away from the main road, away from the other trucks that were running through the scales. It was a concrete bay with high walls and a loading dock and overhead fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency she could feel in her back teeth. Two other DOT officers were already there when she pulled in. She hadn't seen them call ahead. She hadn't seen any communication happen at all. She climbed down from the cab and the first officer met her at the back of the trailer. The seals were intact. She confirmed it. He confirmed it. He photographed them. Then he cut them and opened the trailer doors. The rebar was still there, so was the boxed hardware. So were the concrete forms stacked neatly on their pallets, strapped down exactly as loaded. Except there was a space in the middle of the trailer where nothing was. A rectangular absence of cargo that occupied roughly the middle third of the load, pallets there but empty, straps hanging slack. The density of the remaining cargo explained the weight loss exactly. 17,600 pounds of steel and concrete had simply ceased to be in the middle of her trailer at some point between Fort Collins and Laramie. Is this how you loaded it? The officer asked. No, Patricia said, that space wasn't there. Were the seals broken at any point? Not until right now. He wrote something in his notebook. The other two officers were photography. Zenji, the interior of the trailer. The fluorescent lights buzzed. It was February 23, 2023, and it was minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit in Laramie, and Patricia Sullivan stood in a dot bay at 4:30 in the morning trying to understand how sealed cargo disappeared from a locked and sealed trailer. We're going to need you to stay here while we call the freight company, the officer said. She waited in the dot break room for 2 hours. She drank terrible coffee. She watched the news on a small television bolted to the wall with the sound off. Sometime around 5 a.m., she became aware that the two officers who'd been in the bay had not come back inside. She'd seen them go out. She hadn't seen them return. At 5:47 a.m., the first officer came in and sat across from her. We've been in contact with the freight company, he said. According to their manifest, you loaded 80,000 pounds of construction materials. According to our scale, you had 80,000 pounds of construction materials when you crossed into Wyoming. According to our scale now, you have 62,400 pounds. He paused. The freight company says there was no middle section to that load. They say the manifest doesn't include any cargo in the area of the trailer where we're seeing the absence. Patricia stared at him. That doesn't make sense. The trailer was full when I picked it up. I walked the load in Denver. I'm not saying it makes sense, Ms. Sullivan. He closed his notebook. I'm saying that the freight company's position is that they loaded what they loaded, and that the current weight of your trailer is consistent with what they loaded. Then what was in the middle? Well, they can't account for that. She drove out of Laramie at 7:15 a.m. with a cleared manifest and a load that was both fully documented and 17,000 pounds lighter than it had been. She drove east on I-80 into a pale Wyoming morning. She tried to think about the space in the middle of her trailer, the empty pallets, the slack straps, and what they implied. Somewhere east of Laramie, maybe 40 miles, she became aware of a sound from the trailer. She'd been hearing the normal sounds for an hour, the creak of load straps, the metallic shifting that happened on cold days, the rebar settling. This was different. This was rhythmic. Or something. Regular, patient, like something knocking from inside. She pulled onto the shoulder at 8:03 a.m. and sat there for 6 minutes without moving. The thumping continued. Even spacing maybe 3 seconds between each impact. It didn't sound panicked. It didn't sound desperate. It sounded deliberate. She called 911. She told them she was on I-80 eastbound at mile marker 341 and that she had a sound in her trailer that she was concerned about. The dispatcher said a state patrol unit would be there in 20 minutes. While she waited, the thumping stopped. The patrol officer arrived. His name was Hernandez and he was young and thorough. They walked the trailer together. He photographed the intact replacement seals the DOT had applied in Laramie. He broke the seals and opened the doors. Nothing had changed. Cargo where cargo was. Empty space where empty space had been. No one in the trailer. No blood, no marks, no signs of any occupant or disturbance. "Do you want to file a report?" Hernandez asked. "What would I file it about?" He looked at the empty pallets in the center of the load. He looked at Patricia. He was maybe 26 years old and she could see him deciding whether to say something. "My uncle drove for 15 years, he said finally. He used to talk about things he saw on the overnight runs, things he couldn't explain." He paused. He stopped talking about them after a while. "Or did they stop happening?" "He stopped talking about them," Hernandez repeated, which wasn't an answer, and Patricia understood it as such. She delivered the load to Kansas City without further incident. The freight company accepted it without comment. Nobody mentioned the weight discrepancy. Nobody mentioned the empty pallets. She submitted her paperwork and the load was closed out and she never heard anything more about it. That was 9 months ago. She still hauls through Wyoming. She still weighs in at the Laramie port of entry because the route doesn't really allow you to avoid it. Every time she holds her breath at the scale. Every time the weight comes back correct. Every time she lets that breath out and pulls forward and tells herself it was a scale malfunction, a loading error, some mechanical explanation she doesn't have the engineering background to identify. What she doesn't tell anyone, what she hasn't told her dispatcher or her husband or the therapist she started seeing in October, is what she saw in the gap between the DOT bay's loading dock and the trailer floor when the officer first rolled up the door. It was fast, a second, maybe less, just before the door came all the way up and a fluorescent light flooded the trailer. In that brief moment when the trailer interior was half lit, half dark, she saw them in the empty center space. Shapes, human-shaped, hunched together on the empty pallets, too many to count in the fraction of a second she had. Human-shaped but proportioned wrong, limbs at incorrect angles, heads held at tilts that necks weren't designed for. Maybe 7, maybe 12. She couldn't count them in the dark in less than a second. When the door was fully open, the space was empty. The thumping that happened 40 miles later, she thinks now, was not knocking to get out. It was knocking to be let back in. She changed the locks on her trailer doors in November. Heavy-duty padlocks, 2 per door, more than the security requirements demand. She checks them every time she stops. Every single time. The locks are always fine. But sometimes, on cold Wyoming nights, she hears the weight in the trailer shift in ways that don't correspond to road movement. Here's the sound of something redistributing, something settling. Like passengers finding comfortable positions for a long ride. Story 8, the dispatcher who called from inside the static. The dispatcher's name was Lena Marsh, and she'd been dead for 6 days when she called Raymond Kowalski on Channel 19 with his exact coordinates, his trailer number, and the specific amount of coffee left in his thermos, which was 4 ounces and which he'd just checked. Raymond knew Lena was dead. He'd been at the funerals. Lena had been the night dispatcher for Heartland Continental Freight for 11 years and had died of an aneurysm at her desk in the Omaha Dispatch Center on October 9, 2022. And Raymond and 11 other drivers had attended the service, and the afterthing at the Holiday Inn where her family served sandwiches and told stories, and Ray had cried a little in the parking lot because Lena had talked him through 3 white-knuckle situations over the years and had remembered everyone's kids' names and birthdays and had called him on the CB every night just to check in. And now she was calling him on Channel 19. Raymond, honey, you've got a situation developing at mile marker 178 on I-29. You need to take the exit at 181 and hold there. He was on I-29 northbound in South Dakota, 13 miles from the Iowa border at 11:47 p.m. He'd just checked his thermos because he was trying to ration the last of it until he found a truck stop. Lena, he said, because what else do you say? I know what you're thinking. Just take the exit at 181. There's something wrong with the road ahead. Elena, you died. Raymond, her voice was the same, exactly the same. The slight Midwestern softening of vowels, the patience she'd always had, the tone she used when she was very serious about something and didn't want to argue. Take the exit. Oh, he took the exit. He pulled into a Casey's General Store parking lot at 9:51 p.m. and sat there and watched I-29 through the window. He was 3 minutes ahead of whatever she'd warned him about when the lights went sideways on the overpass. There were 4 of them, sedans from the look of the lights. They were going north, which was correct for that side of the highway, and then they were going nowhere, and then they were going sideways, and then for just a moment Raymond was watching a 4-vehicle accident happen on the I-29 overpass at mile marker 179, exactly between where he'd been and the exit he'd taken. Lights and then darkness, and then the red and white strobing of emergency lighting beginning in the distance. He sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. Then he drove north around the scene and continued his run. Well, he didn't call dispatch, he meant to, he kept not doing it. Here's what he told himself. Lena had monitoring access to the highway system. Dot cameras, state patrol radio, weather feeds. She'd always known things she shouldn't have been able to know from a dispatch desk in Omaha. She'd been brilliant at her job because she could synthesize information from a dozen sources simultaneously and translate it into useful guidance for drivers. She'd known about the accident because she'd seen it developing on a dot camera. The system showed her the vehicles moving erratically and she'd called him. Well, from the grave. He knew this explanation didn't work. He knew it completely and specifically didn't work, and he held it anyway because he needed something to hold. The calls started coming 3 times a week. Always Lena, always accurate, always useful. She guided him around a jackknife truck in Nebraska that happened 8 minutes after she called. She told him about black ice on a bridge near Sioux City that he confirmed with the state patrol report he found later. She called him on a Tuesday afternoon to tell him his left rear tandem tire was running low and he checked, and it was 4 pounds under spec, and he hadn't felt it yet but would have in another 50 m. Idols. She never said where she was. She never explained the phone calls from the grave. She talked about current conditions, gave him information, said, "Stay safe, hun," the same way she always had. She asked after his daughter by name, which was Emily, and asked how the knee was healing because he'd had surgery in September, and when he said it was better, she said she was glad. He started recording the calls in November. He had 17 recordings. He'd listened to all of them multiple times trying to find a seam, a tell, something that would convince him this was a prank or a malfunction or a hallucination induced by fatigue and grief. He found nothing. The voice was indistinguishable from the hours of dispatch recordings he had from the years of working with Lena. He'd compared them. The vocal timbre, the speech patterns, the specific Omaha cadence. Identical. He called Heartland Continental in November and asked whether anyone had been using Lena's login credentials, whether there was a memorial protocol where they had someone covering her old contacts, whether there was any explanation. The HR manager he spoke with was kind but clear. Lena's accounts had been deactivated on October 10th, 1 day after her death. There was no memorial protocol. Her CB handle had been retired. Nobody was using her credentials or attempting to impersonate her. The calls continued. On December 14th, 2022, the call was different. He was in Iowa, westbound on I-80, 2 hours outside of Des Moines. 2:22 a.m. The CB crackled and Lena's voice came through, but wrong. Not wrong in a supernatural way. Wrong in the way a voice gets wrong when the person speaking it is trying to maintain control and not quite succeeding. Raymond, I need you to listen very carefully. I'm listening, Lena. I can only explain this once. I'm going to explain it once and then I have to stop calling because staying connected to you isn't good for you. Do you understand what I mean? I don't know what you means. It means I'm not supposed to be talking to you, not me, not anyone like me. There are rules about this and I've been breaking them because I was worried about you and because I could and I can't anymore. They know I've been calling. He gripped the wheel. Where are yous laying us? That doesn't translate. I'm sorry. Raymond, I need you to stop driving the overnight runs. Not because something specific is going to happen. Because you've been out here alone in the dark for too long and you've started to thin out. You understand what I mean by that? He didn't, but he felt it. He'd been feeling something like it for months and hadn't had words for it. Like he was becoming transparent at the edges. Like the membrane between him and the dark outside was getting permeable. And take day shifts, Lena said. Sleep at night. Let the dark do what the dark does without you in it. Lena's. I'm glad I got to be your dispatcher, Raymond. You were always my favorite run. You always said thank you. The channel went to static. He's run day shifts since January. He sleeps 8 hours a night. His daughter visited in February and said he looked better, less hollow, her word hollow. He'd lost 18 pounds over the fall that he's mostly put back on. Oh, he still has the 17 recordings. Oh, he's never played them for anyone else. On the night of February 7th, 2023, he was in bed in a Marriott in Lincoln, Nebraska, asleep by 10 p.m. the way he'd trained himself to be when his phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. All static. The deep and wet and long. And then, barely audible under it, something that might have been Lena's voice, or might have been the specific frequency of his own loneliness finding shape in the noise, saying something he couldn't quite make out. Oh, he is hung up. He lay in the dark hotel room and listened to his own breathing and did not check whether there were any accidents on I-80 that night, did not look at the dot camera feeds, did not reach for the CB. He closed his eyes and he stayed very, very still, the way you do when you're not sure whether moving will help the predator find you. By morning, he'd almost convinced himself it had been a wrong number. Almost. Story 9, The Weight of Empty Miles. The GPS rerouted Thomas Aquifer 16 times in 4 hours, before he realized the routes it was suggesting would form a perfect circle approximately 40 miles in diameter around a point in central Kansas that, when he finally stopped and mapped it on paper, corresponded to no road, no structure, no geographic feature that appeared on any official document, but which Thomas had begun to think of in the 5th hour of driving as the place the GPS was trying to take him. He'd been westbound on US-56, empty trailer on the way to pick up a grain load in Dodge City. October 31st, 2021. He'd made this run a dozen times. Empty westbound in the evening, load up overnight, eastbound by morning. C. Emply known his. The first reroute came outside of Council Grove. Unexpected road closure ahead, the GPS said, in the pleasant female voice he'd customized and named Vera. Please proceed to the route. He proceeded. The new route took him south on a county road he didn't know. Fine, these things happened. He drove south. The second reroute came 12 minutes later. Unexpected road closure ahead. Back north, then west on a different county road. He accepted it. Accepted the third one too. By the fourth, he was looking at the GPS screen with the specific suspicion of a man who's been given wrong directions before and knows what the beginning of it feels like. By the 16th reroute at 1:18 a.m., he had been driving for 4 hours and was in almost exactly the position he'd been in when he started, give or take 20 miles. He knew this because he'd been watching the compass. He'd made every combination of north, south, east, and west, and found himself back facing west on a county road in the dark in central Kansas with a GPS that was currently calculating its 17th reroute. Well, he turned the GPS off. Well, he kept driving west. The county road went west for 6 miles and then turned north and then curved west again, and he followed it for another 8 miles until it ended. Not at an intersection. Not at a junction with another road. It ended. The asphalt ran out and there was a cattle gate, and beyond it, in his headlights, a dirt track that continued into the dark. He sat there. He was not lost in the sense of having no idea where he was. He had a general sense of his position. He was in Morris County or Chase County, possibly Rice County, somewhere between 70 and 90 miles from Wichita to the east and 100 or so from Dodge City ahead. He was off the main roads. His phone showed one bar, and when he tried his wife's number it rang once and dropped. He tried dispatch. He reached them, but the connection was bad and kept breaking up, and what he managed to communicate was that he'd taken a wrong turn and was sorting it out and would check in when he had better signal. The dispatcher said something he couldn't fully hear. He thought it might have been, "Are you near the center?" but he couldn't be sure. Well, he got out to stretch and look at the sky and think. Though the sky was wrong. Not the stars, not the weather, the orientation. He'd been tracking west by compass all night and knew approximately which stars should be where, and they weren't. They weren't dramatically misplaced. But Orion was not where Orion should have been for his position in Kansas in October at 1 a.m., and the Pleiades were wrong, and when he found the North Star it was about 3 degrees from where it should have sat. 3 degrees isn't much. It's a small enough discrepancy that you could explain it a dozen ways: instrument error, slight calculation mistake, the confusion of a long night. He explained it those ways for about a minute. Then he stopped explaining it. He drove back east. He found a recognizable road 40 minutes later, a state highway with mile markers and a route number he could confirm, and he drove east on it with the specific purposeful speed of a man not fleeing but firmly and irrevocably departing. He reached Dodge City at 4 a.m., 5 hours behind schedule. He loaded the grain as planned. He ate at a diner at 6 a.m. and drank 3 cups of coffee and ate 2 plates of eggs and read the local newspaper, and felt the world reassert itself around him in the form of harvest prices and high school sports scores and a county commissioner running for re-election. He filed his logs. Didn't mention the reroutes, didn't mention the compass stars, didn't mention the cattle gate and the dirt track and the center he might or might not be near. He Googled it, though. When he got home on November 3rd, he sat at his kitchen table and Googled Kansas Central Point Strange and Morris County, Kansas Anomaly and Chase County Unexplained and found nothing. Then he Googled GPS rerouting repeatedly same area and found a forum post from 2019, a thread on a trucker's board, and the op was asking whether anyone else had experienced the GPS going crazy in a specific region of Kansas, and the thread had 47 replies. He read all 47 replies. 31 of them described exactly what he'd experienced: circular reroutes, compass inconsistencies, roads that ended at gates. One driver said he'd driven through the gate and down the dirt track and had arrived somewhere he couldn't describe and had driven back out and had no memory of what he'd seen but had woken up for the next 6 months at exactly 3:14 a.m. every single night with tears on his face without knowing why. The thread was last posted to in September 2019. The ops account had been deleted. Thomas still runs the Dodge City route. He bypasses the relevant area by an extra 40 miles now, a detour that costs him 90 minutes and which he logs as a road condition avoidance without specifying the road or the condition. His dispatcher has never questioned it. He bought a new GPS. He bought a compass. He bought a paper atlas, the big laminated kind that truckers used to use before the screens took over. He keeps the atlas in the cab. He doesn't use the GPS between Emporia and Dodge City. He knows the roads. Last week, somewhere in Rice County, the compass in the cab shifted 3 degrees and held there for 40 minutes before shifting back. He didn't mention it to anyone. He pressed the accelerator down and watched the odometer count the miles and thought about the thread with 47 replies and the ops deleted account and the driver who woke up crying every morning for 6 months. He thought about the center. He thinks about it most nights. He's never looked at a satellite map of the coordinates where the GPS kept trying to take him. He has the coordinates written down on a piece of paper in his wallet because he worked them out one night and wrote them down so he'd have them. He's never typed them into any search engine. He's afraid of what would come back. He's more afraid that nothing would come back. That the coordinates would pull up empty farmland and blue sky, and the kind of ordinary that hides the best. The paper is in his wallet right now. He can feel it. Story 10, Room 11, 8T The Starlight. The Starlight motor inn at mile marker 94 on US 30 in Nebraska appeared in Deborah Vance's headlights at 3:08 a.m. on November 12, 2022, exactly when she needed it to appear, which was the first thing wrong with it because Deborah had driven US 30 through this stretch of Nebraska more than 100 times, and there was no motel here. She knew what was here. A grain elevator, a Methodist church from the 1880s, a gas station that closed at 9 and 40 miles of nothing before the next town. No motel. No Starlight Motor Inn with its pink neon vacancy sign buzzing in the dark and its 10 visible room doors and its office window lit yellow. She needed it because she'd been awake for 19 hours and had another 300 miles to go and had started doing the thing where the road lines begin to curve in ways they shouldn't, which was her personal threshold. The sign she'd trained herself to recognize as "You're done, pull over." She'd been watching for a truck stop for 40 miles. Nothing. And then the Starlight Motor Inn lit up and welcoming, exactly where nothing should be. She told herself it was new. She told herself she'd last run this road in spring and missed the construction. She parked in the gravel lot, noted that hers was the only vehicle, walked into the office. The man behind the desk was 60-something, wearing a plaid shirt, reading a paperback mystery. Looked up when she came in, nothing remarkable about him. Nothing remarkable about the office, the rack of tourist brochures for attractions she'd never heard of, the small TV playing a weather report, the key rack on the wall with its numbered hooks. "A room for the night," he said. "In a few hours, I'm back on the road at 6. Room 11's, that's our quietest one." He took a key from the hook. Actually a key, not a card, a metal key on a plastic fob with a large 11 on it. She paid cash. She walked to room 11's. The room was a room. Bed, dresser, TV, bathroom. The bedspread pattern was the specific ugly pattern of budget motels in the 1990s, an abstract geometric in brown and gold. The heater under the window ran too loud and too hot. The bathroom had a bar of soap in the soap dish and a small bottle of shampoo and a shower curtain with sailboats on it. It was completely, aggressively, almost forcefully normal. She set her phone alarm for 5:45 a.m. and slept. She woke at 3:22 a.m. Not to her alarm, to a sound. Coming from the room directly above hers, which was impossible because the Starlight Motor Inn was a single-story structure. She'd seen it when she pulled in. 1 story, 10 rooms in a single row. There was no room above room 11. The sound was walking, footsteps, a regular, unhurried pace moving back and forth. The ceiling of room 11, which should have been the underside of the roof, creaked under footsteps that traveled from one wall to the other and then back and forth, patient and deliberate. She lay still and listened to it for a while. Then she got up and went outside. The Starlight Motor Inn was 1 story. She stood in the parking lot in the November cold and looked at the flat roofline and the stars above it and confirmed that there was no second floor. There was no structure above her room. There was no space between the ceiling and the roof where a person or animal could walk. So she went back inside. While the footsteps continued. As she got dressed, she was not going to sleep here anymore. She was not going to check out exactly. She was just going to leave, drive east, find a proper truck stop, sit in the parking lot, and sleep in her cab if she had to. She collect. Told her bag. So when she opened the door to room 11, the parking lot was gone. Her truck was gone. The gravel lot was gone. The office was gone. Beyond the door of room 11 was a hallway carpeted, lit by fluorescent lights set too wide apart so the spaces between were dim and indistinct. The hallway ran in both directions and had doors on both sides, and the doors had numbers, and the numbers were wrong. Not wrong as in out of sequence. Wrong as in they went up fast and kept going. The door across from her was marked 847. To her left, 848. Further down, numbers she couldn't read from this distance. As she closed the door, I stood in room 11. Opened the door again. A hallway, carpet, fluorescent lights. 847, 848. Well, the footsteps above had stopped. She sat on the bed and she thought about what she knew. She was a truck driver, not given to hysteria, not given to dramatic interpretations of experience. She had driven 3 million miles over 23 years. She had seen things on the road and had found explanations for most of them. She was good at staying calm. She stayed calm and she thought. The door opened to a different space than the outside. The space was a hallway in a large building. The room she was in appeared to be room 11 of a much larger structure than the Starlight Motor Inn's 10-unit row. There were at minimum hundreds of rooms, probably more, given the numbering she'd seen. She needed to find an exit. She opened the door again and stepped into the hallway. She went left toward lower numbers because logic suggested that lower numbers were closer to an entrance. She walked. The carpet was a dark red pattern, clean, not worn. The fluorescent lights above her hummed. The air was climate-controlled and tasted faintly of recirculated air and something floral, the kind of cheap air freshener that hung in elevator cabs. Room 801. Room 794, room 787. The numbers weren't consecutive, they weren't consistent. She passed room 614 and then room 603 and then room 598 and then room 1204 and then a stretch of corridor with no doors at all. She walked for what felt like 20 minutes and the numbers made no sense and the corridor did not turn and did not end. When she stopped, she pressed her back to the wall and she breathed, assessed. If she had a phone, she checked it, no signal. She had a flashlight in her jacket pocket, small LED, she always carried one. She had her truck key, which was useless, and her room key, the metal key with 11 on the fob, and she had approximately $7 in her wallet and no weapons of any kind. She turned back the way she'd come. The corridor had changed, not dramatically, not in a way she could have pointed to on a map and said here and here and here is where it's different, but it was different the way a face you know well is different after something has happened to it. Subtly, essentially different. The carpet pattern was the same. The lights were the same. The doors were the same. But the arrangement was wrong. The proportions were wrong. And when she reached a door marked 11 after walking for perhaps 10 minutes, she was not certain it was the same door she'd left. So she went in anyway. Room 11, brown and gold bedspread, sailboat shower curtain, too loud heater, her bag on the floor where she'd left it, her phone on the charger. 4:01 a.m. on the clock. She picked up her bag, she sat on the bed, she waited. At 5:45 a.m., her alarm went off. She opened the door to room 11 and the parking lot was there. Her truck under the sodium light, frost on the windshield, the grain elevator visible 200 meters east, the Methodist church dark. The starlight motor in office window was dark. The neon sign was off. She walked to the office and knocked, no response. She tried the door, locked. She pressed her face against the glass. The office was there, desk and key rack and TV and tourist brochures, but the interior light was off and there was no one inside. She drove east. She found a truck stop in the next town, bought coffee, sat in the warm booth until she felt capable of thinking clearly. When she was capable of thinking clearly, she thought about the footsteps above a room that had no above, and the hallway with its random numbers and its incorrect proportions, and the way the corridor had been the same and different on the way back. She thought about the 7-hour stay in room 11 that had felt like 30 minutes of wakefulness. She thought about how rested she felt, genuinely rested, the best sleep she'd had in months. She Googled the Starlight Motor Inn. No results. She searched for motels on US 30 at mile marker 94. No results. She searched for the specific combination of elements, the location, the name, several variations, and found nothing that matched. She drove her route. She made her delivery. She drove the return trip on US 30 eastbound. She passed mile marker 94 at 7:22 p.m. There was no motel, grain elevator, Methodist church, closed gas stady. On flat Nebraska November dark. She checked her phone. There was a note in her notes app that she didn't remember writing. Her handwriting, definitely hers, she'd confirmed it against other notes. It read, "Room 11 is always available. You may need it again." She deleted the note. She drove east. She's passed mile marker 94 11 times since November. Westbound, always at night, always tired, always late. The Starlight Motor Inn has not appeared. But on 3 of those 11 passes, she's caught a pink tinge in her mirrors. Just a moment, just a flash. Like neon on the edge of appearing, like something almost ready to show itself again. She checks her notes app every morning when she wakes up. So far it's been empty. So far,